point after the session. And comments and questions are welcome throughout the webinar using the chat or Q&A box. And please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. We're a small group and we're really looking forward to getting to know each other. So just a brief overview of how the agenda of our session today. We'll start with introductions, then welcoming remarks by the Executive Director of Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, André Baudry, who's part of us today. We'll then continue with some quick polls, provide some context on Cooperative and Mutuals Canada's role within the Investment Readiness Program, and then we'll dive into the panel discussion and cover 4 different thematics before we conclude with next steps and open the floor for questions and answers. Before we proceed, we would like to recognize that Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada headquarters is located on Insidi territory on the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We also extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions for this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So as I mentioned earlier, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on this Wednesday afternoon. I hope you've had a chance to grab your lunch. We'll be here together for another hour and a half. So as mentioned, my name is Nadia Ginit, and I am a part-time consultant on behalf of the Conseil de la Coopération d'Ontario for Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. I am the focal point on the Investment Readiness Program for the cooperative sector. Today, we have an amazing panel on the cooperative movement, a key driver of social innovation and social finance, where we'll be talking and tapping into the social finance market and the role that cooperatives play in the broader social innovation and social finance ecosystem. So we have Michael Toy, the Executive Director of the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, CETNET. We also have 2 members of the Social Innovation and Community Development Directorate of Employment and Social Development Canada, David Roney, Policy Officer, and Robin Weisner, Senior Policy Analyst. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you, Ellen. Greetings. We have some greetings from Vancouver. That's great. I will now give the floor to André Baudry, who's the Executive Director of Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. André, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Welcome to everybody to today's webinar. I'd like to thank my colleague Nadia, my colleague Grace Buzanga, and Danielle Brunet for organizing today's webinar. It's wonderful to have you all with us today. Right in the middle of Co-op Week. And as many of you know, cooperatives and mutuals contribute a lot to Canada's economic well-being. We represent 3.4% of GDP, almost 200,000 jobs. By jobs and GDP, matrix calculations, we're larger than the automotive, manufacturing sector, telecommunications. So we're quite large in Canada. But what we have to remember is also the social impact and the social contribution of cooperatives. And it all starts in communities across Canada. So we're very, very proud to be working with ESDC on this program and working with all of you. And I just want to underline that CMC is working more and more with social enterprise partners across Canada. We share the same values and we share a lot of the same priorities. And I think that by collaborating together, especially through programs like this one, we can have a significant impact on the economic and the social well-being of Canada. And that's an important part of Co-op Week, which, well, for us is every week of the year. So I'm just looking at my list to make sure I haven't forgotten to recognize anybody. A quick thank you to our panelists today, Michael Toy, David Rooney, and Robin Weisner. Very kind of you to be with us. And for our panelists and for all of you, we appreciate that our virtual work lifestyle these days can be quite demanding. We don't have a lot of downtime, a lot of breaks. Some of you have your children coming in and out of your offices during the day. I know that I do. I'm a little old to have a 6-year-old, but I do, and she visits me at least every hour in the office. So it's very kind of you to all be with us today. So without further ado, please enjoy the webinar. I will be leading the webinar. CMC is planning a national town hall on Monday, and I have to get back to that. But thank you to Nadia, my colleagues, all of you for being with us, to ESDC and to our panelists. Have a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andre, for these welcoming remarks. We are going to proceed with the polls. Before we dive into a short presentation, I really want to take the temperature of our virtual room to get a sense of who we have here. So Grace will be throwing the poll. We have 4 polls coming up. I can't quite see if it's being on. Sorry, just trying to figure out how to throw the poll here. Apologies for the delay. Seems it's a function that I do not have access to. So perhaps we can have you all write in the chat box. If you are a cooperative, if you are a member of the social innovation, social finance ecosystem, or if you can put other, or just say exactly what your role is within the sector. If you're an expert service provider, we had 4 different options for our polls, but I guess at this point we can just improvise and have you write on our chat. We have some. Great, thank you. Thank you, Tara Williams, welcome. We have a co-op. Great, so as I move forward with the next question, we wanted to know if any of you submitted an application for IRP funding. We realize this may not be an answer you would like to answer in the chat box, would have been easier with the poll. So let's we will just move forward with those. We'll just skip this one. I think most important here is if you can throughout the session mention your role and the sector you're in, and then we can follow up with you directly. The main point here is making sure that we get to know each other and stay in touch. Another question that we wanted to ask was if you plan to use social finance in the future. So again, feel free to keep this in mind or connect with me directly following the webinar. And again, apologies on our front from the CMC team. We've had a little issue throwing the poll, so we'll just pass on that one for now. And again, here we're also trying to see if these questions were actually more targeted for co-ops to get a sense if you consider yourself a social purpose organization and start engaging and making sure we feel comfortable with those definitions, as we will mention them further in the presentation. Okay, so our goal here today is really to see whatever your role in the ecosystem is, and we want you to come away with a better understanding of the broader social innovation and social finance strategy and better understand the role that cooperatives play in it. So I'll move on with providing some brief context on CMC's role. I won't read through the text here, but it's generally speaking, our job, CMC, is as a knowledge mobilizer for the co-ops to apply and or to consider social finance to grow their impact. and that they are given proper consideration within the larger ecosystem. We're also sharing tools on social innovation and social finance as they become available. And you will be able to access those on a web portal that we launched in the summer. It's a bilingual web portal to facilitate all the access to resources. So make sure to check it out. You will have access again to those webinars, so you can access the web links. We have 3 different sections that look over the role of the co-op sector, broader like the IRP. We have sections on social finance and social innovation, and throughout the following months, we will be adding some more information. And we're also gathering a list of expert service provider for the co-op sector. If you're one and you're participating to this webinar, please consider signing up or sharing it within your network. We are coordinating our efforts with other investment readiness partners, like Innoweave of the Mackennal Foundation, so that we can showcase and maximize your visibility on various platforms. And just to provide a bit of context on the Investment Readiness Program for those who may have not heard about the program, IRP was launched to prepare social purpose organization for the Government of Canada's $800 million social finance fund, which was announced in 2018. So the IRP helps social purpose organizations access social finance, such as charities, co-ops, social enterprises, and nonprofits. It's important here to note that depending on their incorporation status and activities, co-ops might fit in a few different categories as a nonprofit or charities. And but it's important to note that co-ops are eligible in some way. Also, I think it's also important to note that most funding cycles are closed, and you will be able to keep it up to date with the ones that are open on our web portal. And briefly, to define social finance, it's a means to an end through a repayable investment that generates a positive social, environmental, and/or cultural impact. Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada held a webinar in August 26th in collaboration with Innoweave on social finance and investment readiness for cooperatives. You can access both the recording and the presentation slides on our web portal, and we hope that you will be able to visualize it to get a better sense, in-depth knowledge on that. So without further ado, we will begin our panel discussion. We'll get started. As mentioned earlier in our agenda, we have a series of topics that we would like to cover, including social innovation and social finance strategy, how the IRP came about and how it fits within the Social Finance Fund. Very important and timely topic also is diversity and inclusion in the IRP and the role that the cooperatives play within this broader ecosystem. So because we have, I'd say, a bit 10 minutes before we wanted to launch this discussion, I didn't necessarily want to dig a bit deeper into the presentations of the panelists, but we can take maybe 1 minute so that each can just briefly introduce themselves and speak more about their directorate and their organizations. And then we will move forward with some more topics that will give us a sense of how they've been involved with all these topics. Towards the end of our time, we'll open the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions that you've been thinking about throughout the discussions. So feel free to write in the chat box or the Q&A throughout the discussions. So just to start, perhaps I'll start with Michael Toy, if you can briefly introduce yourself and just mention what the role of CEDNET is.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah. So the Canadian Community Economic Development Network is a national association of mostly local groups and citizens, active citizens, some associations and networks themselves as well, that basically create all sorts of economic opportunities that improve social and economic conditions. So it's we have a lot of co-op associations, co-op developers, part of the network, social enterprise developers, rural development folks, people working with people with disabilities, any group, whether it's a location, a particular geographic region or population that tends to be excluded from the mainstream economy. And so that's obviously the connection with co-ops as in a pioneering model that helped integrate people into the economy and provide economic solutions. So.
Great, thank you, Michael. Robin, if you'd like to just briefly present yourself, and then we'll move on with David.
Thanks, Nadia, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here on the panel and join my fellow panelists and those in the audience. We're getting used to this concept. So I've been with government for just over 10 years now, after having done a few other things in my career earlier, including as a consultant for the nonprofit sector. My time in government has been focused on social innovation, social finance, social enterprise activities in two departments. First at ESDC, actually that's I think where I first met Mike way back when, and then I went and worked at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, helping to build a social innovation, social finance, social enterprise kind of focus to settlement agencies or opportunities to settlement agencies there. Rejoined ESDC about a year and a half ago, specifically to bring my own expertise and knowledge of this area to help in the design and structure of the investment readiness program as it rolled out in conjunction with the Social Finance Fund. So I'm pretty attached to this program. I'm very attached to the partners in this program, and delighted to be part of this, and particularly to see how partners such as those here and CMC in particular and SEDNet in particular have been growing and implementing and sort of realizing the dream that we had for IRP. I may feel a bit far-reaching to call it a dream, given that I'm just basically a policy analyst, but there are those of us who get as passionate as our partners do about this, and we appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you. David, it would be great also to learn more about your role within the directorate.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia, and hello to everyone out there across the country. Great to be here with you today. Yeah, so I've been with government going on 5 years now. I joined the program just under a year ago, so working on the implementation and the design of the IRP. So my day-to-day activities, I talk a lot with Nadia and Daniel at CMC. We liaise quite a bit as I work with them and ensuring that the co-op model is well represented within the IRP ecosystem. So that's sort of the day-to-day activities that I'm taking part in, as well as liaising with other partners in the ecosystem.
Great. Thank you, David. I think I really appreciate the introduction here. I think it gives a bit of context with the type of questions I'll be asking you all, and it will show a bit how it fits within the different sections. So moving on, I'll kick off the conversation asking questions that draw out some of the high-level policies and trends that we should be thinking about. As mentioned earlier, when describing the IRP, in fall 2018, the Government of Canada announced the creation of a $805 million social finance fund to be invested over the next 10 years. So this first question goes to you, Robin. Since you've been involved in the design of the IRP, can you tell us more, how did the Government of Canada come to develop the Social Finance Fund? And if you can also tell us more about the Social Innovation and Social Finance Strategy Co-Creation Steering Group?
Happy to, Nadia. So the Government of Canada has actually been kind of engaged and interested in social innovation, social finance for at least a decade. But I would say a significant leap forward was taken in 2017 when the government convened the Social Innovation, Social Finance Steering Group. And that group, having sifted through, I don't know, somewhere close to 200 potential nominees, selected 16 very passionate and diverse leaders, practitioners, experts from multiple fields, including community, philanthropic, financial, and research sectors in order to engage in a co-development activity alongside government to help shape a government's strategy towards social innovation and social finance. And acknowledging that social finance is really just an element of social innovation, but they are linked because these are areas where government can have an impact. And the government's taking recommendations from the steering group in terms of what are the most useful and appropriate steps for government to take. This is a marketplace that is that functions, without government intervention. So it's always an interesting study in terms of where and how should government actually engage and where is it most useful. So that co-production process, and there are 12 recommendations, and you've Nadia, in your slide is the cover of that steering group report, which articulates both the recommendations and gives the background and context for those recommendations to government. Since that time, the government has taken these steps, addressing recommendation 6 in terms of announcing the creation of Social Finance Fund. The fund has not launched yet, but the government is committed to doing that. It's a very technical process, so it is taking a little bit of time to launch that. And it was always intended to be launched this year, like this fiscal year. And so maybe a little bit delayed in part because of COVID, but is underway. The Investment Readiness Program is attached to the Social Finance Fund, and I'll tease that out for you a little bit, but I know we're going to touch on sort of the Investment Readiness Program a little more later. But focusing on the Social Finance Fund, that is to improve the access to capital for social purpose organizations, including cooperatives, and helping to address what the steering group referred to as the capital gap, using government investment for repayable financing to catalyze or leverage other capital in order to grow the supply side of the marketplace. So that's the focus of the Social Finance Fund and sort of a background to it. So helping to create a more robust marketplace for social finance was the general inspiration and intention around creating the Social Finance Fund. We'll get to the Investment Readiness Program in more detail later, but whereas I described the Social Finance Fund as the supply side, the Investment Readiness Program is the demand side of that marketplace. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but maybe I can stop talking there for a second.
No, perfect. Thank you, Robin. Perhaps also we can maybe add to it what inspired the Social Finance Fund. Are there models that the Government of Canada is using that's been implemented maybe elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, there are. I would say in the UK has been a leader in this area. And they have been doing this, they have had a government commitment to creating a social finance marketplace and significant government investment in that marketplace for, I think about 15 years. Maybe Mike can correct me on that, but it's quite a long time. And they've used various tools and mechanisms, many different types of social finance, many different styles. I'd say that would be one of the leading examples that we would have used. But fundamentally, the Canadian landscape is a little bit different. Our marketplace are different, our demands are different. And so the government relied on this, the wisdom presented to us by this diverse group in the steering group, and also engaged not just the 16 members, but each of them were on the committee because they tapped into other networks. So in fact, there were hundreds of stakeholders and hundreds of opinions that kind of went into cooking up this, what the steering group recommendations come to. And they are to address specifically the Canadian marketplace. So yes, there are examples. We weren't going out, like being at the forefront. There's other European examples, and in the US, of course, they've had a long history of sort of community-based social finance investments, and Australia and New Zealand as well are examples.
Great, thank you so much, Robin. We are going to have a closer look at the IRP. So fast forward 2019, here we have a concrete delivery model for the IRP. I remember myself seeing this slide during the Social Finance Forum last year in Toronto before embarking on this role, and I was quite surprised by the amount of stakeholders that were involved. So you know very well the behind the scenes of this delivery model. Can you tell us more about how this specifically has been designed and if there are any unique aspects about it?
Yeah, well, this is where I get really passionate and excited about it. So bear with me. So the design has a couple of fundamental aspects to it. I'd say the first one is that it is very much an intermediary model. It is leveraging the community knowledge, the community intelligence of our partners, and using their expertise in order to build an ecosystem. This is the kind of work that government cannot do terribly well. We can support and encourage and sort of cajole and fund it, but it is not work that we can really do. So we rely completely on our partners, and it is their depth of knowledge, their expertise that we have put together in this diagram. And as clunky as this diagram is, it does also demonstrate, as you say, the number of partners, the way that they interconnect, and maybe most importantly, that big chunk in the very center with the social purpose organizations. It should be noted that the social purpose organizations sit in the center, not because they are a significant partner, but because they are the heart of the program. So the intention was primarily to deliver as much funding as possible directly to social purpose organizations so that they had the opportunity to make their own best choices about what they needed to do to prepare themselves for the potential to use social finance as a tool to grow or solidify their impact. Social finance is a tool as a means to an end, and I don't hesitate to say that it is not for every single social purpose organization by any stretch. But among the various social innovation tools that could be used, it is one. And right now we are in a moment of time where we are growing that opportunity. So where we grow the supply side with Social Finance Fund, and this program is designed to grow the demand side by allowing social purpose organizations, or SPOs, I may refer to them as SPOs, that critical grant where they can just take a moment, take a step back, build capacity. Even we intended it to be along the full continuum of readiness. So even at early stage as a SPO, you're thinking, is that really for me? Is social finance really an opportunity or potential for me? And the grant allows you to think that through, to do feasibility studies, etc. But having said that, we are using the partners, this readiness support partners that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, to infuse that intention with the community knowledge, the awareness of, as we are all struggling with what is readiness, but they're hearing from the SPOs. So those partners give us a range of intentional community connection through community foundations, a focus on organizations run and led and to the service of women through the Canadian Women's Foundation, Indigenous-led partners, including the National Association of Friendship Centers and the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation Associations, help to engage Indigenous SPOs. And in Quebec, as we know, there is a more richly developed social economy, and the Chantier d'économie sociale is at the heart of the Quebec economy, and so they clearly are an important partner to address that region. So having started with, we need SPOs at the center, we turn to our readiness support partners, and the others in the system that you see across the bottom, the ecosystem mobilization initiatives, as they're called. It's a clunky word, but it seems to be working. And that's where we get to the others who are so critical to building a supportive infrastructure for the investment readiness program, for the SPOs themselves in the longer term, and for that marketplace. And that's where you'll see what we, sort of awareness builders include SEDNet, include CMC, and include other groups. David will talk a little bit more about them later, that help us to make sure that we've got bridges between communities that may have felt excluded from this marketplace in the past. On the other side of that mobilization initiatives at the bottom are those that we engaged as research-focused projects. So they are the experts in delivering us, that is us across the system, the significant intelligence to sort of deal with the things that we all find are common challenges, like impact measurement, like access to social finance intermediaries. And also emergent in this space is the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience, with their specific project to help small, medium enterprises convert to be a social purpose organization. And that's kind of an emerging project, but can absorb a lot of social finance in that process. And the buildup of social finance intermediaries being done by new market funds. So many different partners play, and our expert service providers like S4AS that bring to the table the knowledge and awareness of what SPOs need, what is readiness, as they prepare themselves to deliver services in a new model, maybe a fee-for-service basis, which is because the grants go to the SPOs, so the SPOs will look for expert providers, these and many others across Canada who can provide expert services. And just one final point about how this knits together is that the organizations we went through a process of soliciting for proposals because we didn't have time to do a full call for proposals, but they each have a role to play, but none of them can do their work without engaging with others. So it's a very collaborative process. They need to engage, they need to talk, and not only just among themselves, but with SPOs and then with those that are outside this ecosystem that help to build the marketplace. And our evaluators that are looking at the program now are saying that that's kind of working, is that the partners are engaging with community-based and local networks to raise the awareness of the IRP, and that they're seeing real value in adapting IRP to local implementation and in different contexts and different jurisdictions. So I'll stop there, but that gives you a sort of a broad overview of how things were put together and how it's functioning.
Thank you so much, Robin. This is really clear and really nice to visualize the broader picture. I did want to touch on one aspect before we don't want to finish with you yet because there's so much is to see how does the IRP fit in the broader social finance fund, as in the learnings that you're finding so far in terms of the capacity building and the needs around this readiness. How, in terms of timing, how do the lessons learned provide, how does it fit within the broader social finance fund? If that was clear, I was just trying so that we can see what is being learned and how can we leverage what's being learned by the IRP.
Yeah, so if we had all the time in the world, we have lots more time. I feel like we are learning so much from the implementation. We're learning so much from our partners. They have, you obviously and others who have joined us today have contributed significantly to not one, not two, sort of there are evaluations. There's a developmental evaluation going on. There's a formative evaluation going on. We are learning so much through that process, but our partners have been willing enough to engage with us through this sort of reality testing, like monthly check-in calls. David will speak to that as well, and mentioned it early, but this is not a sort of a cookie cutter program. So we committed ourselves to continuously engaging and adapting wherever we needed and support our partners if they needed to adapt through constant conversation, constant meeting at sort of in the space of once a month. And obviously COVID has, I am grateful that we have those established relationships and that our partners have been so willing so that we collectively can address something, of course, we never saw coming. So that's been very fruitful as well. So I think, I think that means that as we are learning, and I think even more so learning what SPOs are saying that they need about social finance, we've had understanding of what SPOs need for social finance from the perspective of the social finance intermediary as they get to that very last stage of, ready for investment. We learned through expert service providers how they have been helping SPOs to become ready for social innovation, social finance, social enterprise, all along the continuum. And now the SPOs themselves are speaking to what they need. So that's data that we're collecting and analyzing on all those fronts, data from the SPOs, data from the evaluations, data from our reality testing. And if we had, another year, we'd be able to wrap it all up and understand. But we work very closely with our colleagues who are developing the Social Finance Fund. So at least from a government perspective, we can talk to each other. And the marketplace is relatively small in Canada. So many of our partners are engaged, in elements of development of the Social Finance Fund as well. But I'll read you one little quote that I was reading from one of our evaluators. And this, I think, will be of interest to you and the audience. The value of collective efforts, community, local, and regional, is reportedly attractive to investors. Investors will be more likely to invest with a number of organizations that come together in a collective effort for social innovation and social impact. So I think, I like Mike's nodding his head, yes. So maybe he wants to pick that up, but we're trying to build into our system and into the marketplace the sensibility of collaboration, moving away a little bit from a highly competitive finance environment. It would appear that is helping to build a more robust and more accessible and inclusive marketplace. Or let's hope we can achieve that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Robin. Before we dive deeper into the SPOs need, which David will be able to touch on, I wanted to ask a question for Michael and get a sense of what the Canadian Community Economic Development Network's role is within the IRP, and then maybe reflect a bit more on that collaborative aspect, since you have an exposure on a national front, trying to see how do you find this delivery model and the type of collaboration that it has brought to the community development ecosystem.
Sure. And so I jumped just to the presentation of SEDNet previously, but I do want to say thank you to Nadia for the opportunity and Co-ops and Mutuals Canada for organizing the session. And hello to everyone, all the participants out there. I saw a few familiar names on the list, so that's terrific. And of course, thank goodness for passionate policy analysts, right? No apologies to be made for that. That's it really shows. We appreciate it. SEDNet's one of about, as you can see, about 14, I think, or so ecosystem mobilization partners as part of the IRP. Our particular mandate is to be supporting regional ecosystem development and awareness raising, because in our experience, what we've seen is that an ecosystem model on a regional or provincial scale tends to be what's been most effective in Quebec, in Manitoba, internationally, to support the development of robust social innovation, social finance, social economy landscapes, and that collaboration and co-learning, that kind of regional ecosystem model is just essential to the field. So in terms of how I find the delivery model, and I'm not just saying this because Robin is here and David and others, but I'd certainly, my experience, we give full credit to the officials at ESDC who've been responsible for the design and delivery of the IRP, who did it under very challenging circumstances after the announcement in the fall economic statement and the impending election that happened last year. I think they've done a really tremendous job within the constraints of government. And in this case, it's a government that I think is learning what, co-creation means, how that works. The co-creation group that Robin described was, an excellent initiative. We entirely endorsed the report, but it wasn't really co-creation, I think, in the truest sense of the word. There were 16 sector stakeholders and one government representative who provided recommendations. And I'd be very happy if the government just picked up those recommendations and ran with them. But I think it would seem to be an advisory role rather than true co-creation. And I recognize it's complicated, and we can't get around ministerial authorities, but I think there's more that can be done to really benefit from the co-creation, co-construction model that this type of work requires. And so the appointment of the Social Innovation Council that we're hoping will come will, I think, act as a focus for the continued dialogue and engagement that needs to happen for this work to continue to evolve. And I mean, the bottom line is that sector actors like SEDNet and others want to be full partners in social innovation and social finance. That's how it works. We have respective roles. As Robin has said, there are things government has to do and does well, and there are things that government can't do well. And that's where it's our job as sector actors to be stepping up and being partners to do that. And so I think that's the model that we're working towards, and we're making progress. So that's, in that sense, ESDC's choice to work with intermediaries is excellent. Of course, as an intermediary, I'll say that. But I think if we're going to see a next iteration of the design of that IRP slide, Robin, I've been in a couple of meetings in the last week that's used the metaphor of soil, I think. And so SPOs are the heart of this model, you're right. But I think the ecosystem mobilized organizations are kind of cultivating the soil, right? Creating a fertile environment for some nonprofits and charities, some co-ops, because not all, as we've seen, not all nonprofits and charities need social finance, or that's appropriate. Co-ops might be in different spaces, but if we can grow the number of truly social purpose organizations that can use social innovation and social finance to improve their impact, then I think we're being successful. It is the collection of groups that ESDC pulled together through their solicited process, I think, is an excellent constellation of organizations. It's been a very intensive learning process, a very short-term learning process. So it was 2 years, from the beginning, and shorter than that by the time agreements were signed. And COVID, of course, has made things even more complicated over those short 2 years. And of course, an election has delayed action on most of the co-creation steering group's recommendations. But from what I've seen, the program has been extremely successful as a learning pilot. We've demonstrated huge demand and opportunity. And now we just need to keep moving in a timely way on the renewal and expansion of the IRP, the acceleration and rollout of the Social Finance Fund, the appointment of the council, and ultimately the implementation of all 12 recommendations.
Thank you so much, Michael. I definitely feel like there is a momentum here that is not going to be lost regardless. There's a lot of interesting collaborations ahead, and again, even SAMHSA is really excited to be sharing all of that in the upcoming months. Thank you. So we'll wrap up this section and move on with some diversity and inclusion aspects. So now that most cycles are closed, I have a question for David. You have done a lot of regular reality testing calls and regular check-ins with many of the IRP partners. And if you can tell us overall, how do you feel that SPOs have benefited from funding?
Yeah, so I think this can be looked at in two ways. There are the SPOs that are receiving funding directly from our readiness support partners. We've had about 300 organizations who have received direct funding from the partners to date. As you mentioned, cycles are closed now, but we haven't announced, or our partners haven't announced the final recipients for funding, but we've had about 300 SPOs to date who have received direct funding to enhance their capacities and build their organizations, which is fantastic. And even more fantastic is around 80% of those organizations serve underrepresented communities. So we really feel that our reach and our inclusivity of the program has been really great as a starting point. And again, we're still early days. We're still waiting on results from, or not necessarily results, but additional recipients to be announced from some of our partners. So there's still more data, more information to come on how those SPOs are, who they are, and how they're benefiting from the program. The flip side of that is that, of course, we can't fund every organization who applied to the program. And as Mike mentioned, as Robin mentioned, we've seen huge demand from organizations for the IRP. We received, or our partners received, a little over 1,500 applications, again, to date, for funding. So obviously, we weren't able to fund each and every organization. But what we have been able to do, and again, looking back at the previous slide, is we have about 19 other organizations that are working to build and develop an ecosystem that will benefit not just the social purpose organizations who have received direct funding, but social purpose organizations around the country. And we're engaging, or we're partnered with organizations that help serve underrepresented groups. So organizations like SETC, which is a social economy through social inclusion, which helps support BIPOC communities, or the Native Women's Association of Canada. These are organizations that are helping us reach SPOs across the country and really help broaden and diversify the social finance marketplace in the country. One of the other things I'll mention is that, again, it's not just underrepresented groups that we're supporting. Nadia, as we work closely together, we're also ensuring that different types of organizations are heard as they apply for funding. So co-ops, not-for-profits, we're trying to ensure that as broad an array of organizations can benefit from this type of funding. And so far, the results point that we've been able to achieve that.
Amazing. Thank you, David. Are there any specific ways that the partners are trying to reach out or engaging with these communities, regardless of them being a co-op or not? And some of those lessons, like digging deeper into what are some of the lessons and things that can be improved?
Sure. So again, and I'll start, and maybe Rob and Mike want to jump in. They may have unique views on sort of the lessons learned to date in terms of the program, but definitely what we're seeing is engagement across the country to specific underrepresented communities. So I'll tackle SETC, again, focusing on BIPOC communities. And the uptake from my work with them, I've heard, is that the awareness building activities they're doing, so webinars, information sessions, toolkits that they're developing to help support BIPOC SPOs and SPO leaders really helps enhance the diversity of the ecosystem. Another example would be an organization like the Native Women's Association of Canada, where they're developing training modules for other organizations within the IRP ecosystem and really helping them understand how to respectfully engage Native women when discussing social finance or trying to help them develop social finance capacities. So we're definitely seeing some unique ways and some new ways of engaging specific communities and ensuring that their voices are heard and included in the ecosystem. And the response has been extremely positive. Again, an organization like SETC, they're seeing their webinars are largely attended. There's at least 100 participants at each of their webinars. We're seeing uptake from across the ecosystem from different partners. And there's definitely a huge appetite for this type of program, this type of funding that we're seeing and we're hearing from our partners.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, David. Sorry. I wanted to add from CMC's side, we noticed that cooperatives across Canada may not necessarily identify as a woman co-op or a BIPOC co-op. So it's sometimes difficult to even identify them because they're not identifying up loud. So any suggestion as to how we can tackle that? We see here opportunities, obviously, to collaborate with other partners who can provide some tips and tools as to how we can further engage.
So again, the wonderful thing about the ecosystem that we've created here is that we're trying to create as inclusive of an ecosystem as we can. So if there are organizations that perhaps aren't sure where they should be engaging, I think there are IRP partners within the ecosystem, at least from an awareness building side, that can help them sort of navigate where they may fit or where they may think they fit, or maybe direct them in the way that helps them identify the supports they need to advance.
Thank you. Michael, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, can I just build on that? I think I've heard at CMC is actually building a CRM of all the co-ops in Canada. And I think that's kind of the roles of ecosystem partners, is to understand our stakeholders and their profiles and to be able to connect them to the opportunities that David mentioned. But also it reinforces the importance that we've been hearing from BIPOC advocates for a long time about the need for disaggregated data. So we need to have the right kind of information on the firms, the communities, the organizations we're working with, to be able to recognize the realities they're facing, the kinds of opportunities that will be appropriate for them, and how we can support them. To come back to the IRP, I think, and once again, this has been a big step forward for the social innovation and social finance ecosystem, in my view, is the proactive engagement that ESTC did through the IRP to reach out to Black and Indigenous sector organizations. That I can say, there wasn't as much, there was not nearly as much engagement and dialogue as has been created through the IRP. I have to say that, the dialogues that I've been part of, that the IRP has seeded, that has helped convene, is really generating vital conversations and enriching and grounding the discussion that we've had. And even, I think it's beyond, David, you talked about reaching new audiences, but I think it's also mutual, and I'll accept royalties from CMC for using that word later on, in the sense that we are hearing from those communities that have long-standing practices of social innovation and social finance that haven't necessarily been recognized, what their reality is, what they can share, what we can learn from them, and how we can learn from each other. And so it's really that mutual learning that builds a stronger ecosystem, and ultimately is going to be supporting better the populations that social innovation, social finance is supposed to be directing towards. And at the same time, for the intermediaries that are involved in this work, we worked together on a equity and solidarity statement earlier this year. That was a lot of the IRP partners. I think those relationships were created by the IRP, and it allows us, because of those relationships, to I think, go further on the anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice that we as intermediaries need to be advancing. And so, I think there's lots more that still needs to be done, but we've seen some good progress thanks to the thoughtful design of the IRP so far.
Thank you, Michael. I can also add to it, I can testify these opportunities to exchange and having those platforms to make sure we can amplify the message, at least from an ecosystem mobilization perspective. For example, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples have launched 2 courses on Indigenous innovation. So these type of data and information is really key so that everyone across the ecosystem recognizes the way that we refer to social finance and social innovation. Thank you all for your input and discussions on this front. We are right on time to move on to the next session, which apologies. Yes, so here. So we are on the cooperative's role in social innovation and social finance. So Michael, you've been an advocate for co-ops for a long time in the social innovation space with various collaboration in the ecosystem. We saw that the Canadian SET network has a wide range of stakeholders. Can you tell us what are some of the challenges that co-ops are facing, and why are co-ops key in the social innovation and social finance ecosystem?
Sure. So actually, we might forget now that we're doing webinars and virtual meetings all the time that this was kind of novel a decade ago. And SEDNet first started some of our national webinar series. One of the first sessions we did had the catchy title of Co-ops, the Swiss Army Knife of Community Economies, right? Because co-ops are such a long-standing and adaptable business model. In many ways, I think it's fair to say it's the original social enterprise, right? The first co-ops were created to meet the needs of people who'd been left behind by the mainstream economy, creating democratic, community-rooted businesses that serve a social purpose. So I think where we're at now is, and it's a long-standing agenda, I think, around recognition and a level playing field in terms of supports for business development for co-ops compared to undemocratic businesses. But co-ops have a huge foundation of success to build on. And the co-op ecosystem, of course, is strong. There's regional and national development networks, a significant asset base. There's a range of investment options, an evolving legislative and regulatory framework, and a well-established business model. And I think Robin saw me react when she was gave her quote earlier about investors being interested in collaborative models. And in fact, it reminded me of the famous stats on the 5- and 10-year survival rates of co-ops being double those of traditional SME startups. And I think it's the same principle, right? It's those collective initiatives, whether it's collective businesses as they're described in Quebec, or collective community projects. They're more, I think, durable and probably harnessing, group intelligence, more likely to be successful than some individual or yet smaller things. So it doesn't surprise me that investors or funders are interested in collaborative models. And in terms of challenges, in addition to the recognition and a level playing field and some adapted supports that I think do recognize the collective nature of co-ops and some of the challenges around investment that might provide, there's also the risk of success and business success. And I think there's probably 3 initials that are a bad word in co-op circles these days over the last couple of weeks, but we've seen just an example of a very large, very successful co-op that I think lost touch with some of its original founding values and members, and we've lost now. And so and I think there's lessons about how to manage success and stay true to the principles and values that are at the heart of cooperatives. And I don't want to, I always say I don't want to get into definitions, but I think understanding how, whether it's the S4ES social enterprise definition or the Quebec's definition of the social economy, that understanding that a democratic business structure is certainly better than not being a democratic business structure, but it isn't always, it doesn't guarantee or isn't a reliable proxy for social purpose. And I think understanding the other values and principles that come with the co-op principles in terms of community engagement and putting people before profit and making sure we're serving the community can really help, I think, support the growth and long-term success of co-ops.
Thank you, Michael. Any advice as to how cooperatives can articulate this to recognize themselves as SPOs? Like, are there, because there seem to be sometimes some gaps, or maybe the democratic process may take time to be able to be part of it. Any advice as to how they can accelerate that process? You mentioned S4ES, there's investment readiness tools out there, but any other tools that they could use to make sure they participate to it?
Well, there's two that come to mind quickly. BiSocial Canada has a certification process related to procurement opportunities in their case, but I think that's a relatively straightforward way of sort of pre-qualifying in some ways and having a certification or a seal of social purpose. And the other I would add, I think the common approach to impact measurement is also working with some evaluation providers, social impact measurement platforms that allow firms, SPOs primarily, to be articulating the change that and the impact they're having in communities. And so that's not necessarily as clear cut, but I think if you're able to use some of the platforms that the common approach aligns with, then that it reinforces, I think, and really clarifies the social impact that you're having as a co-op or a social enterprise. And that, is an easy reporting mechanism to point to when questions like that come up.
Super, thank you very much, Michael. Robin, David, anything you'd like to add? Perhaps any experiences you've had so far with cooperatives and anything you'd like to add on those discussions? Okay, I think we can move forward with looking actually at the results of the IRP. I think that will say a lot around the IRP impact. So far we have an overall, so SAMC gathered a list of co-ops, and we found 39 co-ops that were funded for a total value of $2.6 million. So I think that's here where we see sometimes, over the different applications, there's been some interest and there's some investment here. Just to note also that as a next step, Cooperative and Mutual Canada will be focusing on stories of those 39 selected co-ops, and then understanding which co-ops didn't get funding and why. And then we look to use the data to better understand needs and development, which I think will better inform SPO's needs and co-op specifically needs in the IRP. So here we have, to date, these are the different results. So there's 24 co-ops funded out of 90 SPOs supported by the Chantier de l'Économie Sociale. So these are the final results. Community Foundations of Canada has supported 15 co-ops in the first cycle of funding. So we will be awaiting some new data, which we will be able to add and demonstrate some more statistics in the coming months. But I do have a question here for Robin and David. Looking at COVID-19, these funded co-ops might be hard pressed. Any changes in the IRP delivery model or process in the horizon?
Well, I can get started and maybe David wants to jump in. Yeah, sorry. I guess the short answer is we are a pilot program, as Mike specifically mentioned, and the IRP at this point comes to a hard stop as a program at the end of March 2021. However, because of COVID, the department has taken a general approach to be as flexible as possible with programs that are impacted, and in particular, the projects that are ongoing by our partners. That said, I know that our partners also did everything they could to check in with specifically the ones you mentioned, Community Foundations and Chantier, are constantly checking in with the SPOs that received funding to ask them too, what is it that they could do given COVID, and if that has been challenging for them to achieve their project. So I think throughout the system, we are all making any adaptations we can and where we can, given the circumstances, and continue to remain open to listen to see if we can do more. And I'll turn it over to David and see if there's anything, or even Mike for that matter, because he sees this functioning on the ground, if there's anything else they want to add.
Yeah, I can just echo Robin's comments. We're really trying to be as flexible as possible when it comes to the organizations we're working with, and therefore the SPOs, because we want the program to be a success. And obviously, none of us could foresee COVID coming, when you're into the program. So definitely, we're keeping an open mind, and we're trying to, work with our partner organizations as best we can.
And just short comments to wrap up. I think COVID, of course, means a lot more of these Zoom meetings, which is tough because, as the throne speech described us, we're a social sector, in fact. So I miss seeing you all in person from time to time. But I think for co-ops to play a more active role in the social innovation, social finance ecosystem, especially frontline co-ops, the main barrier, I think, is one of language. Understand that, the social innovation, social finance ecosystem is for you as well. And that, that for co-ops to change the systems and overcome the barriers of awareness and understanding that I think currently prevent or are impediments to growth and success, it really requires investment in sector building activities. So I'm sure many of the frontline co-ops that would be seeing this are already members of their provincial associations or NCMC indirectly. And so that sector building activity will and is changing the landscape to allow co-ops to not be anomalies, but to be actually the preferred and default business model, democratic businesses to be much more common. Ultimately, I think the strength of co-ops is the power of people and the strength of that connection, right? It's, I think, was it Jeremy Rifkin at the International Summit of Co-ops said a few years back that, and as Andre said previously, co-ops have all the industries, all the people, and the appropriate form: democratic, open, distributed, transparent. And so I think the opportunities really are limitless, and the economic imperatives that we're facing as we lurch from one crisis to the next are really lining up with the co-op principles. So I think as people are even more isolated, the meaningful connection that people can feel by being part of a co-op is a huge opportunity. And we can go beyond the traditional vendor-consumer relationship to one of ownership, shared responsibility, and collective action. So I think the sky's the limit. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mike. Actually, you just managed to wrap up this panel discussion. I was looking to ask how you are seeing co-ops adapting to COVID, and any thoughts that the co-op sector can do to take a more active role in the social finance. So thank you for putting that together. It's really good words for the cooperative sector moving forward. On that note, I'll just sort of look over some of the key messages and some of the aspects we've discussed here. I think one key aspect of the IRP in the social finance market is the value, again, of this collective efforts and how cooperatives fit within this model, with its cooperative model, with people's connections and how it can really be a driving force in putting forward these principles and the impact that's being made on the ground. We also mentioned that throughout the upcoming months and even now, all these efforts are cultivating the soil, and we'll soon be able to plant the seeds. So everything that's being done so far is really allowing some key conversation and exchange of knowledge. The learning aspect here is key. I myself am learning tremendously across the ecosystem, and I think it's all individually. We have lots to be learning and to engage ourselves to better understand the supply and that demand, and then making sure that everyone can participate within the broad range of SPOs. So I will be briefly looking over some next steps. We have covered a lot of different information here, but there are platforms in which you can be also accessing all these resources and at all time. I highly encourage to visit SAMHSA's IRP web portal and also the IRP website, which has lots of resources that have been gathered by the 25 different partners. So there's tremendous information out there and many more to come in the coming months. For example, New Market Funds will also be sharing a mapping of social finance intermediaries on a national level. So these are all research projects that are ongoing that are going to be key for the different SPOs and the different industries to start understanding where they fit and then providing some feedback. I have a list here of recommended readings, the recommendations of the Social Innovation and Social Finance Strategy Co-Creation Steering Group. It really gives a good idea of the 12 different recommendations. I had mentioned earlier the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples Indigenous Innovation Models. There are 2 courses that are already available on their website. Imagine Canada also published in August a very interesting report entitled "Are Charities Ready for Social Finance?" So I encourage also you to read that. S4ES has launched also an investment readiness assessment tool, and Innoweave's webinar slides are available. Any questions or comments, don't hesitate to contact me at innovation@canada.coop. And we have another 15 minutes now open for question and answers. Trying to see here, there have been some comments earlier. I'll share them from Ushnish Segumpta, who agreed with Mike earlier and mentioned how disaggregate data by race, ethnicity, gender, age, disability was much required in the sector that has been asked for years. So that's one comment we've received. I'm not sure I see questions here.
Ushnish also asked a question that I think might be for our colleagues at the ESDC, that since Canada is a signatory to the Open Government Partnership, I think Ushnish, you're asking about the results of grant funding. Is that available in an open data format? And it might not apply since it's delivered through intermediaries, right? So I don't know. Do you know, Robin?
Ushnish, if you're like the question in terms of open data, like that's true, Mike. That is, the government certainly has proactive disclosure and on the agreements, the grants that we make to our partners. So that information is available under proactive disclosure on all government websites for any department. But if the question is the open data on who has received which SPOs have received funding, I believe that most of our partners have posted that. Community Foundations of Canada have posted that on their website. Canadian Women's Foundation has posted on their website. I believe Chantier has posted on theirs. So each individual partner has posted the successful or the applicants that have received funding through this round. I think it's worth mentioning, though, as David highlighted earlier, I just think it's worth mentioning that the program has been substantially oversubscribed. That is, we had no idea how many SPOs would be interested in engaging in this and feel as if they wanted to explore this option. But just to run through those numbers again, there are, David, maybe you've got them in front of you, but it's over 1,500 applicants. The total ask of those applicants was something close to $90 million. Our partners, and thanks for nodding, our partners had available closer to, in the rounds already completed, closer to about 20 million to distribute. I think I've got that roughly right. And so we're able to support 350 or something SPOs to date. Community Foundations of Canada has just closed their most recent round, so obviously haven't announced those recipients. But we're certainly learning from that as well, that there is high demand. And Nadia, I'm so interested in the analysis that you'll be doing, not just on the cooperatives that have received grants to date, but obviously among those who have not received, as is true of all the 1,500 SPOs that applied, there are many that might be amply qualified, and we would have loved to have been able to fund, but there just isn't enough funding available yet. So it's not to say that, the 11 to 1,200 that were not funded were not qualified. We just didn't have enough money in this short 2-year pilot project. So we continue to be learning from not just those who are going to be or have received grants, but those who didn't, and about what they wanted to achieve. And that's good information from us on both sides.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin. We also really look forward. I think the upcoming months will be very exciting because there's a lot of data that all the partners will be able to engage with. So I think maybe we can reconvene and have some more engagements and webinars in the coming months so we can share some of that and understand where we can fill some gaps. Yes, feel free to add any additional questions. I'm not seeing any on my front. Oops. Okay, I think, okay, so we have another comment, the other, okay, so they say the other question is, that's the other question. So on OTF, so Ontario Trillium Foundation and other organizations will release applicants as well. Can the list of applicants be made available?
Can the list of applicants be made available? Sorry, I just...
Yes, it's to see the list. I guess the number of applicants are made available.
The numbers are available, right? But not the list of applicants. And again, that would be up to our partners. That's not up to us to, that's their information, not ours.
But I think it would probably be good practice. I mean, open government, not transparent information, transparency would be valuable in terms of accountability and process, but we need to build in sort of appropriate permissions, that kind of stuff from the beginning of the process. So that's definitely something worth considering in the future design rounds.
Yep, good point. Good point. Yep. Yeah, Vishnish, that's a fair point, and we can certainly think about that as we think deeply and hard about the potential for IRP renewal. It's not that we have to think about it. We are hoping and working to do what we can as bureaucrats to see that the pilot project could become a longer term program in order to continue to build on exactly the kind of ecosystem building that has been done by our partners like SEDNet, CMC, S4S, and the others, which have made significant contribution to creating this sort of robust ecosystem. And we're very much doing our part to see if it won't continue, but we can hope and work towards that.
Just to wrap up, one thing we're sure is we're going to continue our collaboration with the different partners. For instance, the Waterloo Institute for Resilience, WISER, we realized a lot of synergies also with the work we're doing on social acquisition and conversion. So there's a lot of exciting collaborative work that will be beyond the scope of the IRP in the longer term, also on the procurement. So I think here there's not an end to the IRP, it's just a beginning of many more projects to come in a collaborative manner. So we have 5 minutes, but I think if there are no other questions, I will seize the opportunity to just thank very warmly our panelists. Thank you so much for being here with us and for your contributions. Michael Toy, David Rooney, Robin Weisner, thank you so much. And to our participants who stayed with us until the end for a good hour and a half in this Wednesday afternoon. And also very warm thank you for Olivier Lepage, our interpreter who's here with us. Thank you to the Cooperative and Mutuals Canada team, and we wish you well. Please stay safe and healthy. It is obviously not an easy time, but we are together. It is on my end of my first time moderating such a conversation.
Good job.
So, thank you for bearing with me. It was a great experience to be all together, and please stay in touch. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thank you.